In this class, we are not only covering the teachings of the Buddha. Among the teachings of the Buddha, we are talking about the Mahayana Dharma. And within the Mahayana Dharma, we are giving meditation instructions on bodhicitta. So therefore, before we begin, please correct your motivation towards the thought to achieve full enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. Oh, sorry about that. The ultimate object of attainment of the Mahayana is the omniscience of Buddhahood. Can we achieve that? Yes. We know we can achieve that because we can prove it. It has been established by valid cognition. And also, scripturally, it is established. It is said by the Buddha that we too can achieve that state. So not only have many of the great Panditas and Mahasiddhas of India and Tibet achieved such a state, there are many beings among us now who have bodhicitta at the very least and are bodhisattvas going about their life. But we of little merit don't necessarily encounter such beings. We don't have the good fortune to come into contact with such beings with these realizations, because since beginningless time, we have been overcome by grasping at, by self-cherishing, grasping at ourselves. We have not accumulated enough merit, and we have not purified enough of our obscurations, and therefore we don't necessarily come into contact with these people. Persons who had bodhicitta in their continuum include the great Mahasiddhas of India, such as Nagarjuna and so forth. These bodhisattvas who were always striving for the welfare of others. And their bodhicitta did not come without effort. They too started by listening to the teachings of the Buddha, studying the scriptures, studying commentaries, contemplating their meaning, and then meditating on that meaning. And through that meditation, they achieved actual experiences of bodhicitta. So these human beings who walk the earth, who have developed bodhicitta, are our examples for how we too should develop bodhicitta. Another great Indian Mahasiddha or Pandita who was a bodhisattva is, of course, Shantideva, the author of the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Now, he didn't author bodhicitta through merely guessing what it is like and what the practices might be. He authored bodhicitta. He authored this text on bodhicitta through his own real experience of having generated it. And although we don't have the fortune to meet him directly, we can at least infer, based on his writings, what a great being he was, and verify ourselves the truth of his claims. I'm glad I clarified with Geshe what he was talking about, because I had the exact opposite interpretation of what he was saying. So we are practitioners of bodhicitta, but of course, it's not something that we can develop quickly and straight away. And it is because we have certain obstacles to developing bodhicitta. And the obstacles to developing bodhicitta are not necessarily external obstacles, because there's nothing really external to you that is stopping you from generating bodhicitta. It is our own internal obstacles of grasping at a self-cherishing that mainly prevent us from giving rise to it. So if you really truly strive to generate bodhicitta, then you need to identify these obstacles that are preventing you from giving rise to it. And they are self-cherishing, grasping at a self, and so forth, all the other afflictions. But it's easy to say that, but it's not necessarily easy to identify them in our own continuum. If you think about a real worldly example, let's say a businessman engages in business for a day and he doesn't get much profit by the end of the day. That wise businessman will think, what is it that caused me to not bring in much money today? You'll think about the conditions. Or if you are a restaurant owner and you didn't turn much profit for that day, you will consider why, and you will try to identify the cause for why you are not bringing in much money. Is it because the food is bad or whatever? We, however, in our pursuit of giving rise to the most precious mind, Bodhichitta, don't do that, however. We don't think, what is truly stopping me from doing so? So the main obstacles to giving rise to bodhicitta are said by Sakya Pandita, the great scholar. And he taught, I believe it's 4 types of attachment that create obstacles for us. The first being, if we are attached to this life, then we do not practice dharma. I have to get the list from Gelug because I haven't heard this before. Yes. Oh, okay. So I'm not familiar with the Sakya teaching. So when Gelug is explaining this concise name, I haven't recognized it. I really apologize for that. I wish I was more familiar with their tradition. So essentially, it's a very short, concise text by Sakya Pandita. And whether your aim is to achieve the arhatship of a hearer or solitary realizer, or whether you wish to achieve Buddhahood through the Vajrayana, this is very powerful teaching. Right. So, okay, it's slowly becoming clear to me as Geshe explains the meaning. Also, Ivan sent me the verse. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So essentially, it's talking about 4 bad types of attachment that one needs to be free from. So, yeah, it's a verse on the 4 freedoms from this type of attachment. If you could put that in the chat, Ivan, it's probably helpful. So the first line of the verse is, if you are attached to this life, you are not a true spiritual practitioner. So you can take each of these lines of verse and apply it to the generation of bodhicitta. If I wish to achieve or generate bodhicitta, then I cannot be attached to this life, because in doing so, I am not a true spiritual practitioner. Because if I pursue worldly dharmas such as fame, renown, money, and so forth, then how could I give rise to the Mahayana bodhicitta, right? To conventional mind generation? They are incompatible. The second line reads, if you are attached to samsara, you do not have renunciation. So if you're attached to samsara, essentially you are buying into the appearances of happiness within samsara and believing them to be truly happy and not by nature suffering. And we also have to understand how this ties into the generation of bodhicitta. So if you're buying into the illusions of this life and believing the temporary happinesses to be true happiness and not just temporary happiness that will turn into suffering, you will not give rise to renunciation, right? And through not being able to recognize suffering and therefore not being able to give rise to renunciation, you can't give rise to great compassion. So you have to see the link between these two, right? No renunciation means no generation of great compassion. And if you cannot generate great compassion, you cannot generate bodhicitta. So therefore, understand in this life, even if you wake up in the morning and you're really happy, you have a great start to your day, how does it always turn out though? You hear some bad news throughout the day, or somebody's rude to you, and that happiness fades away, turns into sadness, and so on and so forth. You can give any example. So any happiness within samsara is not stable. And therefore, if you are attached to that, you can never have renunciation, never have great compassion, and therefore never give rise to bodhicitta. The third line is, if you are attached to your own self-interest, you have no bodhicitta. At all times throughout the day, we mostly just think about ourselves, right? I need to eat. I need this. Only concerned about my needs, right? I need to go here. I'm cold. I'm itchy, whatever. Only focusing on yourself and your own needs easily leads to developing attachment, hatred, and other afflictions. And when these arise in your mind, bodhicitta becomes further and further away. And it makes it much more difficult to genuinely meditate on thoughts of bodhicitta, right? It won't come easy if you let yourself be overcome by self-cherishing. So therefore, in order to engender bodhicitta in our mind streams, we need to part from our own interests, our own needs, part from the focus on that, and take upon the welfare of others and be more concerned with others. So Geshe wasn't exactly sure where he got cut off. So I think he's gone back a step in his explanation, but that's okay. So to repeat with the third line reading, if you are attached to your own self-interest, you have no bodhicitta. Self-interest here refers to only thinking about yourself and forsaking thinking about others. So that is what you need to be parted from, right? If you don't part from that extremely self-centered attitude, then no matter how much you might pretend you are giving rise to bodhicitta, it's never going to happen. Some people might worry and think, I can't give up all of my own interests and goals in this life, because then what's left for me to do in this life, right? That's just not conventionally acceptable. But that's not what it's asking you to do here. As beginners and as people who exist within a society, we need certain conditions to get through our life, right? We have to have a job. Either you're a businessman, you go to an office, whatever you do, you need to make some money. That's perfectly fine. And that's not what it's asking you to give up here. Here it's asking you to forsake an attitude that will forsake others for your own ends, right? An attitude where you want to get what you want at the cost of others, right? So that attitude, that sort of clinging, even if we can't abandon it completely, it needs to be reduced as much as we are able to. If it so happens that you do have an occurrence of strong attachment to yourself, your own interests, at that time, try to reason yourself out of it by thinking, me and this other person are exactly the same in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer, right? It's not just me in this world who appreciates being happy and does not want to suffer. Everybody has this same fundamental experience, and therefore there's no need for me to distinguish that much between myself and others. Instead, I should consider their interests as much as my own, since we are fundamentally the same. It's only that I'm in one body and they are in another. So if you're able to think in this way, then at that time when strong attachment to your own self-interest arises, hopefully through habituation, you will be able to lessen it further. For example, if you're really attached to a belonging, whatever it might be, at that time you think, this is mine, it's nobody else's but mine. Well, think about it a bit further. It didn't just pop into your existence. Somebody else probably made it. Or somewhere along the chain of it coming into existence, other people were involved. So thinking in this way, you start to be less attached to I and mine. Reasoning with yourself, you slowly weaken these strong thoughts. For example, you might think, well, I bought it, I paid for it. Well, okay, but you don't have a money printer in your house by which you magically accumulated a pile of cash to buy things with. You make money independence upon other people in society. So in a sense, a lot of other people had a part to play in you coming to get this item, right? So this strong thought of it is mine and mine alone decreases when you reason with yourself in this way. And then if you can reason yourself out of this strong attachment to I and mine, you start to feel closer to other people, right? And when you start to feel closer to other people, you get closer to bodhicitta. So it's very important to place these strong imprints on your mind stream to bring you closer towards bodhicitta. So of course, when you think, this is my house, it's mine. Okay, true, it is, right? We're not, implying that if you don't think like that, somebody else is going to steal your house, take it away from you. No one's going to take away anything of yours, but it's important to develop a different perspective towards your belongings so that you don't have such a strong attachment to them. Because so long as you have such a strong attachment to your belongings, then related karma and afflictions arise in dependence upon that. And we don't want that. We want to slowly eliminate the accumulation of such things. So it's important to reconsider your perspectives towards things in your life. So this is essentially a mind training exercise, right? When we talk about lojong or mind training. This is essentially what it is, right? Reasoning with yourselves and using many different avenues of thought in order to decrease the strength of your afflictions. The last line in parting from the four attachments is, if there is grasping, you do not have the view. So here grasping is what is technically called grasping at science, right? Grasping at true existence. So nothing truly exists, right? Things exist differently to how they appear, right? There's fundamentally a discordance between how something appears to you and how it exists in reality. However, if you cling to the thought that I exist by way of my own characteristics, for example, well, you will never achieve the view, right? A realization of emptiness becomes more distant from you. So therefore, Sakya Pandita authored this verse on parting from the four attachments, very profound. And Sakya Pandita himself was an inconceivable scholar, also one who is said to have received these instructions directly from Manjushri in a vision. In fact, there are many stories of Sakya Pandita receiving a lot of teachings through visions of Manjushri. So do you think that you should part from all four of these attachments in order to achieve bodhicitta? I have my doubts about the fourth one, right? If there is grasping, you do not have the view. I'm not totally certain that parting from that attachment is required in order to generate bodhicitta. If you think about it, hearers and solitary realizers, they have the view, but they don't have bodhicitta. So maybe such a thing is not so pertinent for bodhicitta. But definitely the first three are integral to part from in order to give rise to bodhicitta, right? The first is attachment to this life. It makes sense that if you are attached to this life, that you're not really practicing dharma and then therefore cannot give rise to bodhicitta. The second, if you are attached to samsara, you do not have renunciation, therefore you cannot give rise to bodhicitta. The third, it's no need to mention, he says it explicitly. If you are attached to your own self-interest, you have no bodhicitta, of course. If you only think about yourself and forsake others for your own ends, there is no way you can give rise to bodhicitta. So therefore, you should reflect at least on these three at all times and strive to separate from these three attachments and place strong imprints on your continuum so that you may in future give rise to bodhicitta. And likewise, Rinpoche's three principal aspects of the path are indispensable for achieving full enlightenment. So renunciation, bodhicitta, and the view realizing emptiness. So there's a verse in the three principal aspects of the path where Je Rinpoche says that we must turn away from the appearances of this life. Essentially, we must remove attachment to this life, exactly as Sakya Pandita said. So not only that, not only must we be disenchanted with this life, but if you still practice Dharma with the thought, okay, I'm fine with not getting far in this life in terms of fame and riches, but in the next life, I would really like to have great resources and a great life as a human or a god. That is still incompatible with Dharma practices because you have not forsaken samsara in the sense of the samsara of your future lives. So you must turn away from this life and all future lives and give rise to renunciation. So out of the many obstacles that we possess in our own mind stream that are preventing us from giving rise to bodhicitta, we can identify the main ones to be the first three out of these four attachments presented by Sakya Pandita. So attachment to this life, attachment to samsara, and attachment to your own self-interest. And likewise, as Tsongkhapa said in his three principal aspects of the path, attachment to not only this life, but our future lives are the main reason why we cannot give rise to renunciation, and therefore, in our case, why we cannot give rise to bodhicitta. If we do give rise to bodhicitta, what are the benefits? Shantideva dedicated his first chapter of the Bodhisattva's Way of Life to describing the excellences and benefits of bodhicitta in order to generate joy and enthusiasm in practitioners so that they might give rise to such a mind. So in previous classes, we've covered some of the analogies of bodhicitta, different analogies like for being hard to find and of great value, the analogy for inexhaustible and increasing fruits. So today I would like to continue with another analogy, and this is in verse 13 of the first chapter. It's the analogy for protecting from great perils. So the verse reads, and I've put it in the chat, as though they pass through perils guarded by a hero, even those weighed down with dreadful wickedness will instantly be freed through having bodhicitta. Why do those who fear their sins not have recourse to it? So apparently this verse is telling us that if we have bodhicitta, it can protect us from the frights of the lower realms. So for example, even if you have committed the serious karma of killing your mother, your father, or an arhat, by generating bodhicitta, it is able to protect you from the results, I assume, of these grave karmas. For example, if you're traveling on a dangerous road where bandits and so forth are present, if you take someone with you who's strong and mighty like a hero, then such people don't attack you. Likewise, if you possess bodhicitta in your mind stream, it protects you from the perils of these grave misdeeds you might have committed. The Mahayana teachings fundamentally meet back to bodhicitta. Fundamentally. They don't fundamentally meet back to great compassion because, as Tsongkhapa said in his great treatise on the stages of the path, great passion awakens the Mahayana lineage, right? But it doesn't make one a bodhisattva, for example. So to be a practitioner of the Mahayana requires that we have bodhicitta in our mind stream, right? If you want to be really picky about the definition of a Mahayana practitioner, that is technically what it is. So on the other hand, some people might think or do say, I'm a Mahayana practitioner. Look, I have the Kangyur, the Dengyur, the canonical treatises and scriptures on my wall. I follow these teachings, therefore I'm a Mahayana practitioner. But that is not what makes you a Mahayana practitioner. And likewise, these days in the West, so many students study Shantideva's way of the Bodhisattva, right? As we are doing, for example, which is excellent, and it is a profound text that contains instructions on bodhicitta. But merely studying such a text doesn't necessitate that you are even a Buddhist. For example, if I study Christianity, that doesn't make me a Christian. I can just do it as an intellectual pursuit. What makes someone fundamentally a Buddhist is having authentic refuge, right? And the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as protectors from the frights of the lower realms of samsara, right? And likewise, just studying Mahayana Dharma does not necessitate that you are a Mahayana practitioner, so keep that in mind. So whether we talk about Mahayana mind generation or conventional mind generation or bodhicitta, they're all the same thing, as I've explained to you before. So there are many different types of bodhicitta that you can give rise to in your continuum. And there are different ways you can divide up bodhicitta. And one way to divide bodhicitta is by way of purpose. So when you divide the types of bodhicitta by way of purpose, you get 3 types. King-like bodhicitta, bodhicitta that is like a ferryman or a boatman, and shepherd-like bodhicitta. So although these basic divisions are explained by most of the great commentaries, they don't clearly delineate what separates each of them. However, in Patru Rinpoche's Words of My Perfect Teacher, he does delineate what each of these are. So I'm going to explain it based on his text, which I don't have right now. So starting with the first, king-like bodhicitta. In my opinion, I believe that when the Buddha Shakyamuni first gave rise to bodhicitta, he gave rise to king-like bodhicitta. So what would make bodhicitta king-like? Well, the function of a king is to be the authoritative power over subjects and to protect them and keep them safe and bring them to happiness. Applying that analogy to bodhicitta and an aspiration towards enlightenment, it would entail that you first achieve Buddhahood yourself and then turn the wheel of Dharma for your disciples, through which they listen, contemplate, and meditate on those teachings and achieve Buddhahood themselves. So first you and then others. So the second type of bodhicitta is it's translated in different ways, like Bodhichitta, like a ferryman or a ship's captain. So in ancient times, right, people just had wooden boats and you would get in together and make your perilous journey. These days you have amazing metal ships. Whatever the case, the captain of the ship is on the ship with the passengers. So wherever you go, you arrive together. And in words of my perfect teacher, Patu Rinpoche gives the example of a being who generated this type of bodhicitta as Maitreya. So there's some debate as to whether Maitreya is a Buddha or a Bodhisattva in actuality, and how this debate is resolved in the monastic textbooks is by saying, from a tantric perspective, he is a Buddha, and from a sutric perspective, he is a Bodhisattva. And the reason he is a Buddha from a tantric perspective is because, for example, he is one of the 32 deities in the Guhya Samaja Mandala. So the Guhya Samaja Mandala includes deities such as Avalokiteshvara, Maitreya, Manjushri, Vajrapani, and so on and so forth. And if you are in the mandala of Guhya Samaja, you are a Buddha. As simple as that. In this sutric tradition, so not taking anything from the tantric tradition into account, Maitreya is asserted to be a 10th ground bodhisattva. And it is said he is a 10th ground bodhisattva because there is indication that he is still striving to achieve the Dharmakaya, which achieves his own welfare. And if you're still striving to achieve the Dharmakaya for your own welfare, then you have not yet achieved Buddhahood. Now, of course, to clarify, he does not intend to achieve the Dharmakaya purely for his own welfare, although that is how the Dharmakaya is described. He wishes to accomplish his own welfare for the sake of others. Okay, with that out of the way, in the Tibetan tradition, I don't know what Maitreya is presented as in the Chinese Buddhist tradition, whether he is a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. That's beyond my understanding. Maitreya is taught in the sutras to be the 5th guide to appear in this world, Buddha Shakyamuni being the 4th. So when the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni completely disappear from this world, that is when Maitreya will appear. And just as the Buddha Shakyamuni did so, he will manifest and show everyone the supreme Nirmanakaya and turn the wheel of Dharma for disciples after achieving enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. So essentially, he will do the same as Buddha Shakyamuni. So from our side, we should pray that we meet Buddha Maitreya in the future. We probably did not have the good fortune to come into contact with him 2,600 years ago at the time of the Buddha. But there's still hope that we meet him in the future when he appears in this world. So it's important that we make prayers to do so. The third and final division of bodhicitta by way of purpose is shepherd-like bodhicitta. And Geshe wondered if we even know what a shepherd is, because in Singapore, obviously, you don't have like livestock wandering around. But he thinks that in some Western countries, there's still a tradition of shepherding animals. And at least in Tibet, and this is when Tibetans get really excited because they like talking about these things, there are shepherds for goats, for sheep, for yaks, and they still do this. And of course, the livestock that they shepherd are animals that produce wool and dairy products for people to eat and so forth. So essentially, to shepherd these livestock means to send them first, before oneself, into the pastures in a relaxed manner. and then you follow behind. And transferring that analogy to bodhicitta, it's an aspiration that all sentient beings achieve Buddhahood before oneself, and then one follows behind and achieves Buddhahood last. And in words of my perfect teacher, Patrul Rinpoche gives the example of a being who generated this bodhicitta as Manjushri. And Geshe said, well, in a sense, it makes sense that Manjushri is the illustration for this type of bodhicitta, because he does always appear to aid sentient beings, doesn't he? You always hear of him in stories as the one who's appearing to people and guiding them. So it's possibly true. So that being said, this presentation is meant as a realistic presentation, right? In terms of the types of bodhicitta and the illustrations of the beings who gave rise to such bodhicitta. It's not made up. And it's good if we can reflect on these different motivations within giving rise to the aspiration towards enlightenment. So to continue on with more ways you can divide bodhicitta, Maitreya, in his Ornament for Clear Realization, gives a list of 22 types of bodhicitta, and they are presented by way of similes. I've put it in the chat. There's 2 verses, and the verse starts with, similar to the earth, gold, the moon, and fire, a treasure, a jewel mine, and the ocean. And Geshe said there's no need to read it all because we're not going to go over each of them. If we just go over a couple, right, to give an idea of what we're talking about. The first of the 22 similes is earth. So earth, like bodhicitta, is supposed to be very firm and stable. And that is generated during the smaller path of the path of accumulation, right? The path of accumulation has 3 levels, small, middle, and great. So the smaller level of the path of accumulation. And this acts as the foundation for all future qualities within the Mahayana path. The next simile of bodhicitta is gold. So gold, like bodhicitta, is generated during the middle level of the path of accumulation. And it is said to be like gold because once you develop this bodhicitta at this point, there's no turning back. It does not degenerate. Just like when gold is cut, rubbed, and burned, its nature does not change from gold. It remains as gold. Now, there are still 20 other similes of bodhicitta. We're not going to go through them all because we don't have the time, but just to give you a taste and an idea. So why is it that the first simile for bodhicitta, the earth-like one, is different to that of the gold-like bodhicitta in the sense that we just said that once you get to the middle level of the path of accumulation, there's no turning back. Well, that implies that from the smaller or lowest level of the path of accumulation, there is a turning back. And it is true, bodhisattvas on the lower level of the path of accumulation can develop the thought that this is way too much for me. There are extreme practices within the 6 perfections that I cannot possibly undertake, such as this extensive acts of generosity, even giving my own body away. And it is also said that I must accumulate merit for 3 great countless eons. This is going to take too long. And becoming disheartened with that, beings on the smaller level of the path of accumulation can degenerate from that and pursue the state of arhatship, of a hero or solitary realizer instead. But once you get to the middling path or the middling level of the path of accumulation, there is no turning back once you give rise to gold like bodhicitta. Turning quickly to Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, he explains that there are two types of bodhicitta, aspiring bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta. So I think it's verse 15 that Geshe-la read. Bodhicitta, the awakened mind, is known in brief to have two aspects. First, aspiring bodhicitta in intention, then active bodhicitta, practical engagement. So we should reflect on the importance of bodhicitta. Why do we need it? What happens if we don't have it? If we don't have bodhicitta, then whatever virtue we might accumulate does not automatically become cause for Buddhahood. However, if we do have bodhicitta, then whatever small virtue we may accumulate will turn into a cause for Buddhahood. So at all times, we should be trying to cultivate and meditate on bodhicitta. So Mahayana Buddhism has spread far and wide within China and the East. And Geshe would like to ask you, is Maitreya considered a bodhisattva or a Buddha in the Chinese tradition?
I think it's bodhisattva, right? Because but actually both lah. Because there's Mila 4 and there's Mila Pusa. So they kind of have both also.
Both. So thank you for answering my question. Of course, in our tradition, we boil it down to Maitreya being a Buddha only from a tantric perspective and from a sutric perspective. He is a bodhisattva, but perhaps for the exact same reasons. You explain the same, who knows, but it seems pretty similar either way.